She was sitting right across from me when I read it. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the words on the screen, not the number that had no business being that small. It's the fact that she was right there, passing the bread basket, asking if I wanted more sweet tea, and I had to smile and say yes. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Frank. I'm 67 years old, retired after 31 years as a structural engineer with the county, and until about 14 months ago, I thought I had done everything right. I bought my house in Macon, Georgia in 1989 for $112,000, paid it off in 2011, raised 2 kids. They're my son Owen, who lives in Denver now, and my daughter Sylvia, who never left Macon. Sylvia and her husband Ted live about 4 miles from me. After my wife Carol passed in 2020, they started coming over every Sunday for dinner. It was her idea, Sylvia's. She said she didn't want me rattling around that house alone. I appreciated it. I genuinely did. Ted is an accountant, has his own small practice, does mostly small business taxes, some estate work. He's a quiet man, methodical, the kind of guy who brings a spreadsheet to Thanksgiving. I never disliked him. I never fully relaxed around him either, but I told myself that was just personality difference. Carol always said I was too quick to judge people who didn't talk much. She wasn't wrong about a lot of things. The Sunday dinners became routine. Sylvia would cook. She's a better cook than her mother was, and Carol would have agreed with that if she were here, and Ted would sit at the end of the table and eat quietly and occasionally say something about interest rates or the Falcons. My grandson Miles, who's 9 now, would sit next to me and show me things on his tablet that I pretended to understand. It was good. That's what I'm saying. I want you to understand that it felt good, safe, like the kind of life you build slowly and then get to live in. That's why I didn't see it coming. It started, though I didn't know it was starting, about 2 years before that Sunday dinner. Sylvia and Ted sat me down at the kitchen table one afternoon in October. Ted had a folder. He always has a folder. He slid it across to me and explained that Carol's passing had left my estate in a complicated position. He used words like probate exposure and survivorship gaps and stepped-up basis. I understood maybe 60% of it. I told him that. He nodded like that was fine. Expected, even. He said the cleanest solution was to add Sylvia as a cosigner on my primary checking and savings accounts, and to update the beneficiary designations on my pension and my brokerage account. He said it was standard elder financial planning. He said every one of his clients over 65 did it. I remember looking at Sylvia. She was looking at her hands. I said, "Is this necessary?" Ted said, "It's not necessary. It's protective. If something happened to you, a stroke, a fall, Sylvia could step in immediately. Without this, the courts could freeze everything for months." He mentioned my brother-in-law Raymond, who had a stroke at 64 and whose accounts were inaccessible for almost 4 months while his kids sorted out the legal mess. I knew that story. It was a bad situation. I signed 3 documents that afternoon. Ted notarized them himself. He's a notary, part of his practice. And the folder went back under his arm, and Sylvia made coffee, and we talked about Miles's soccer team for 20 minutes, and I drove home feeling like I'd done something responsible. I did not read those documents carefully. I want to be honest about that. I initialed where Ted pointed, and I signed where he pointed, and I trusted that what he said they were was what they were. That is the thing I have to live with. For a while, nothing seemed different. My pension hit my checking account on the 1st of every month, my Social Security on the 3rd. I paid my bills, utilities, insurance, my truck payment, the quarterly HOA fee for the neighborhood, and I kept a budget the same way I always had, in a small green ledger Carol had bought me years ago. I noticed, maybe 8 months after signing, that my savings balance seemed lower than I expected. I'd budgeted to have around $41,000 in that account. It showed 36. I told myself I'd miscalculated. Maybe I'd moved some to checking and forgotten. I was 66. I let myself believe the number was user error. The next month it was 32. I called the bank. The representative walked me through the recent transactions. There were 3 transfers I didn't recognize, each one between $3,000 and $5,000, each one sent to an external account I had never set up. When I asked for the name on that account, she told me she could only share that information with the account holder of record or an authorized signer. She said authorized signer. I felt something cold move through me, slow, like ice water. I told her I was the account holder. She said yes, and so was the other party listed. She couldn't confirm names over the phone, but could I come into a branch with my ID? I drove to the branch. The branch manager, a young woman named, I want to be precise here, a young woman whose professionalism I am still grateful for, pulled up my account. She showed me the authorization form on file, my signature. Ted's notary stamp, Sylvia listed as full cosigner with transfer authority. I sat in that chair and I looked at the form, and I thought about the folder with all the tabs. I drove home, and I did not tell anyone. That was a Thursday. The following Sunday, Sylvia had everyone over. Pot roast. Miles had a loose tooth he couldn't stop touching. Ted sat at the end of the table like always, cutting his meat into the same size pieces he always cut it into. My son-in-law, Victor, Sylvia had introduced him to her friend group years ago, and he'd married Sylvia's college roommate, Denise. So technically he was family adjacent, not blood, anyway. Victor had been invited that Sunday because Denise was visiting her mother in Savannah, and he didn't want to eat alone. Victor works in commercial insurance, fraud investigation specifically. He travels a lot. He doesn't talk about his work much, but when he does, you realize quickly that he has spent 20 years watching people lie to each other about money. Victor sat next to me that night, about halfway through dinner, while Sylvia and Ted were both laughing at something Miles had said. Victor leaned slightly toward me and said, very quietly, without looking at me, "You need to check your savings account before you go to bed tonight." I looked at him. His face didn't change. He was still half smiling at Miles. He picked up his fork. He said just as quietly, "And don't say anything at this table." I held that for the rest of dinner. The pot roast I couldn't taste. The sweet tea I drank too fast. The conversation I answered without knowing what I said. I watched Ted. He was perfectly normal. He asked me about the leak I'd mentioned in my garage roof last month. He offered to find me a contractor. He seemed entirely unbothered by the world. I drove home and I sat in my truck in the driveway for 6 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I opened my laptop. I logged into the bank. My savings account showed a balance of $4,211. 6 weeks earlier, it had been $32,000. Before that, $36. Before that, $41. I sat there in the kitchen where Carol and I had eaten breakfast for 22 years, and I looked at that number and I understood that I had been emptied. Carefully. Methodically. The way Ted did everything. I called Victor at 8:47 that night. He answered on the second ring. He wasn't surprised to hear from me. He told me he'd been doing a routine review for a client. He wouldn't say who, confidentiality, and had seen my name attached to a secondary account he didn't recognize. He'd flagged it internally at first, thinking it was a clerical error. Then he'd looked closer. The account receiving transfers from mine was held jointly by Ted under a business name, a property management LLC that, as far as Victor could determine, held no actual property. He said he'd been trying to figure out how to tell me for 3 weeks. He said, "I didn't know if you knew. I didn't know if this was something you'd set up yourself." I said, "I did not set this up myself." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. Victor told me not to move any money, not to close any accounts, not to confront Ted or Sylvia. He said the worst thing I could do was tip them off before there was a paper trail established. He said he was going to connect me with an attorney he trusted, a man who handled exactly this kind of case. He said, "Can you hold this for a few more days?" I said I could. I don't know how I held it. I sat in that house for 4 more days knowing what I knew, and I let the week happen around me. Sylvia called Tuesday to check on the roof situation. I told her I was still looking into it. Ted sent me a text Wednesday asking if I wanted to come to Miles's soccer game Saturday. I said maybe. Normal sentences. Normal words. The whole time I felt like I was standing on a frozen lake, listening to it crack. The attorney's name was Gerald. He was 61, semi-retired, still took cases he considered worth his time. Victor said he was worth his time. Gerald asked me to come in with every document I could find. Bank statements going back 2 years, anything Ted had given me to sign, my pension paperwork, the brokerage account information. I spent an afternoon going through the filing cabinet in the study, and I found things I had forgotten I had signed. 4 documents, not 3. The fourth one, the one I had no memory of initialing, gave Ted's signature authority over my brokerage account as well. Gerald looked at that document for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "How long ago was this notarized?" I said I wasn't sure. The date said 19 months ago. He said, "Were you at a table with multiple documents?" I said yes. He said, "This is a known method. You sign the ones you're paying attention to, and this one gets slid in underneath." He said it without emotion, the way you'd explain that a bridge had failed because of a calculation error. Structural. Inevitable once the flaw was built in. Gerald contacted a forensic accountant he worked with regularly. Together they traced $37,000 moved out of my savings over 8 months. They found the LLC, Shadow Creek Property Management, registered in Ted's mother's name, which is why a basic search hadn't flagged it. They found that the brokerage account had been accessed twice, both times for amounts just under the reporting threshold. The second access had happened 11 days before Victor warned me at the dinner table. The brokerage account still had the bulk of its value. Ted had been moving slowly, either out of caution or because he planned to take the larger amounts later. Gerald said it was likely the latter. We went to the Bibb County Sheriff's Office on a Wednesday morning. Gerald came with me. I brought a folder, my own folder this time, with tabs. The investigator assigned to my case was a woman who looked about 40, with the kind of focus that made you feel like she was filing everything you said away in real time. She asked good questions. She asked them without making me feel foolish for having signed what I signed. That mattered more than I expected it to. She said they would need to move carefully because Ted had professional credentials and would have access to attorneys who understood financial crime defense. She said the goal was to build the full picture before any arrest, so nothing could be argued away in court. She asked me if I could continue appearing normal around Ted and Sylvia for a potentially extended period. I said, "How long is extended?" She said, 6 to 8 weeks. I said I could do it. I went to 2 more Sunday dinners. I watched Ted eat pot roast and talk about interest rates. I watched Sylvia refill my tea without being asked, the way she always did, and I tried to figure out whether she knew. Whether she had handed me that tea with full knowledge of what her husband was doing to me. I still don't have a complete answer to that. 8 weeks and 3 days after I walked into that sheriff's office, Ted was arrested in the parking lot of his own building on a Tuesday morning. They charged him with financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, elder abuse under Georgia statute, wire fraud across multiple counts, and fraudulent notarization. The notarization charge was something Gerald had pushed for specifically. Ted had notarized documents he was personally benefiting from, which is a clear violation of Georgia notary law. I did not go to the arrest. I found out about it when my phone rang at 9:22 in the morning, and it was Sylvia, crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said, "Dad, they took Ted. Dad, what's happening?" I said, "I know, Sylvia." The silence after that was the longest silence I have ever been part of. She said, "You knew?" I said, "I've known for 2 months." She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "How much did he take?" I told her the number. She made a sound I had never heard her make before. I don't want to try to describe it. The question everyone asks me, my brother asks me, my friends from the county ask me, is whether Sylvia knew. The investigation looked at this carefully. There was no evidence she had direct knowledge of the transfers or access to the LLC account. Her name was not on Shadow Creek. No communications were found that tied her to the planning of it. Gerald told me that didn't rule out a general awareness, that she may have known her husband's finances had improved in ways she chose not to question, but legally, criminally, she wasn't charged. She and I did not speak for 11 weeks after Ted's arrest. When she called again, it was a Sunday evening, and she said she wanted to come over. I said okay. She sat at my kitchen table. the same table where I'd signed that folder 19 months before, and she cried for a long time, and I let her. I didn't tell her it was fine. I didn't say I understood. I just let her cry because she is my daughter, and that is its own complicated fact. I told her that I needed her to know that I am not a confused old man who didn't realize what was happening. I told her I understood every document I looked at carefully, and the ones I didn't look at carefully were the ones her husband deliberately kept me from looking at carefully. There is a difference, and I needed her to understand the difference. She said she understood. I don't know yet if our relationship will be what it was. I think it will be something different, but something. Miles still texts me pictures from his tablet. I always write back. Ted took a plea agreement. The district attorney wanted to avoid a trial, and Gerald said the plea they offered was reasonable given what a jury trial would have cost me in time and energy. Ted was sentenced to 11 years, with eligibility for parole after 7. He was also ordered to make full restitution, $37,420, plus the fees generated by the investigation. I have received $1,900 of that so far in quarterly payments from a restitution fund. Gerald tells me I'll likely see most of it eventually. I have learned not to count money I don't have yet. Here is what I want to say to you. If you are in the part of life where people start suggesting you let someone else handle things. I'm 67 years old. I ran complex engineering projects with multi-million-dollar budgets. I can read a bank statement. I can read a contract. I know what a notarized document is supposed to look like and what it's supposed to say. The moment anyone suggests that you need a co-signer on your accounts for your own protection, even if that person is family, especially if that person is family, you hire an independent attorney, not the person making the suggestions attorney, not a family friend, your own attorney who has no relationship to anyone in that room. You read every document, every line. You read the fourth document even when you think there are only 3. You do not sign anything at a kitchen table. And if someone you trust, someone who's been quiet in the corner watching things you haven't been watching, if that person leans over at dinner and says something to you quietly, you listen. You don't dismiss it because it's inconvenient or because it will require you to sit with an unbearable thing for 8 weeks. You listen. Victor didn't have to say a word to me. He could have filed his report and let the legal machinery handle it in whatever way it handled it. He chose to tell me directly, quietly, without making a scene at my daughter's dinner table because he thought I deserved to know before anyone else made that decision for me. That's what integrity looks like. It doesn't announce itself. It leans over between the bread basket and the pot roast and says 4 words, and then it picks up its fork and finishes dinner. I am 67 years old. My accounts are in my name alone. I have a financial advisor I found independently, a woman in her 50s who charges a flat fee and has no referral relationship with anyone I know personally. Every document that comes to my desk, I read. If I don't understand something, I ask her. If she doesn't know, we find out together. I still live in the house I bought in 1989. I still keep my budget in the green ledger. Carol's coffee mug is still on the shelf above the sink. I don't use it. I just keep it there. Some things you protect because they're worth something. Some things you protect because losing them would mean losing the last solid ground under your feet. I know the difference now. Cost me $37,000 to learn it, but I know it, and I'm not going anywhere. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in any mystical sense. I'm an engineer by training, and I believe in forces and consequences, in the way one decision transfers its weight down a chain of other decisions until something finally holds or breaks. Ted made choices, each one small enough to rationalize, add a name to an account, slip a 4th document under 3 others, open an LLC, move $3,000, then 5, then watch to see if anyone noticed. Each choice made the next one easier. That's how it works. Not in a flash, but in a slow accumulation of smaller surrenders to a worse version of yourself. By the time he was moving money regularly, he had already decided, months earlier, who he was willing to become. And I made choices too. I signed without reading. I trusted without verifying. I noticed the numbers dropping and told myself I had miscalculated. That's not weakness, it's human, but it is a choice, and choices have weight. What I've come to understand is that integrity isn't a fixed thing you either have or you don't. It's something you practice or you don't, and the practice shows up in small moments long before the big ones. Victor had spent 20 years watching people deceive each other, and somewhere in that time he had decided, quietly and without fanfare, that he would not be one of them. So when he saw my name attached to something that didn't look right, he didn't look away. He didn't calculate the cost to himself of saying something at a family dinner. He just leaned over and said 4 words and picked up his fork. That's not a grand gesture. That's a habit of character built slowly, tested constantly until it becomes the thing you do without thinking about it. I think about that when I sit down with my financial advisor now, going through statements line by line. There was a time I would have called that excessive, paranoid, the kind of thing a man does when he doesn't trust his family. Now I understand it differently. Paying attention to your own life is not distrust. It is respect. Respect for the work it took to build what you have. Respect for the people who depended on you to be clear-eyed. Respect for the people who depended on you to be clear-eyed. Respect for yourself. After Carol died, I think I let some of that slip. Grief does that. It makes you want to hand things over, to let someone else hold the weight for a while. And people who mean you harm are very good at appearing at exactly that moment, folder in hand, voice calm, telling you this is just what responsible people do. What I know now is this. You don't protect yourself by being suspicious of everyone. You protect yourself by staying present, by reading the 4th document, by not letting exhaustion or grief or politeness talk you out of asking the question you already have in your mind. Frank is still here. The house is still standing, and I am still the one who decides what happens inside it.